All right, so we'll get started now. Welcome to Modern Authentication for Office 2013 clients. My name's John O'Luck.
And I'm Shweta. I'm a PM on the Office Collaboration Experiences team.
And we're here for the next 75 minutes to tell you about Modern Authentication, how it works, what's included. And we do have actually a lot of time for questions. We tried to keep the content more compressed because a lot of the interesting stuff comes out from how you're actually going to use it, how you want to deploy it. I only have 2 T-shirts to give away, so that means we can only take 2 questions, so I'm really, really sorry. But no, I'm kidding. We'll definitely do that, and if we spill over, we'll be at the booth, and we're happy to kind of just keep going as long as we need to get you guys the answers you want. So to tell you the truth, we actually went and made some updates to the deck, so I'm going to quickly switch over here. This should be PowerPoint, and it is. Oh, you know what? I'm not signed into PowerPoint. I can't get to my deck. So what would I do? I'd come in here and sign in to get my stuff. Give my password, and here we go. Oh, hold on a second. What's that? You can't actually see this, but take my word for it. The MFA app is on my phone. And what we're doing right here is we're signing into Office 365 with the multi-factor authenticator app. Just clicked on the button there. Sign into sign into PowerPoint. You can see everything's loaded up, all my places on the internet, as well as the presentation I want to use. So, proof positive that it actually is out there. And that was kind of scary starting with a demo, because I'm like, if that didn't go through, this whole thing is shot. Okay, so anyways, real quick, so what is modern authentication? We started throwing these words out there in the last 3 to 6 months, and different folks had sort of different interpretations of what that was. What we mean it to be is the OAuth-based authentication stack that we've plumbed into the Office clients for use with Office 365, so Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Lync Online. The thing here to note is it's actually cross-platform. It's not just Windows. We happen to be doing the presentation on Office 2013, but the iOS, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote apps, those all use modern authentication, as do the Android apps, as do the Mac OS. And every version of Office clients from here on out will also support those. We really want to drill that home. So all the clients out there today support modern authentication. At the end of the day, what we've actually done is plumb through the Active Directory authentication library. That's a library that the Azure AD team provides both us, but also everyone else. This actually replaces the older component, which was the Microsoft Online Sign-In Assistant. You've probably heard the term IDCRL before. That's how we facilitated authentication in the clients. So that library has been replaced by ADAL. And actually, any developer can get ADAL up on GitHub. So for Objective-C, Java, all those are available. Just search for ADAL, and you'll actually find them there. So anything that we're talking about that we did for Office, if you're developing your own apps, you can do that as well. And now I'm actually going to flip back to the other presentation because we have our cheat sheets on there. So what is Modern Auth? OK, so why did we do this? Over the last couple of years, we've been hearing a lot of asks from customers, right? And really, the events of the last 6 to 9 months especially underscore the importance of protecting your resources and assets, right? Right around Christmas time, something big happened, big scary stuff, and suddenly everyone's really aware that our stuff's on the web, right? It's accessible, and that's not great. We want to secure that as much as possible. And more malicious parties are getting more complex, more sophisticated in how they're trying to get in. And so modern authentication enables all the features you need as an administrator to protect your resources. Added to this, bring your own device scenarios. Everyone's got their iPad, they've got their Android tab, they've got their own things that they're coming to use for work or school or fill in the blank. And that just adds to the complexity of your job. It used to be that you would buy those desktops, you would image them, you'd put them on their desktop, their office desk, and then that was it. You knew exactly what was going on there, and you could lock that down. That's not true anymore with people taking their iPads home. Their kids using their iPad, right? All these things can happen now. And so that's what modern authentication is trying to do, is to light up those controls that you need as an administrator to protect the things that are important. And more than ever, people are working remotely. Some folks will never come into your corporate network. They will always work from the road. You can imagine marketing and sales, right? They're on the road with customers, other people's corporate networks, but not your own. And so that just adds to sort of the different vectors from which malicious parties can kind of try to get into your stuff. But we also wanted to we are recognizing that you already have infrastructure in place. We'll talk about this more later on, the Works with Office 365 program, but ADFS isn't the only STS out there. We know that. And so with modern authentication, we now support interop with third-party STSs that use a SAML 2.0 protocol. So we know in a lot of the educational institutions out there, the government institutions, even companies, things like Ping, SHIB, they're all being used. And we want you to be able to continue to use those, but now with the Office clients as well. And so modern authentication stack enables that interoperability and compatibility. So how does modern auth work? We'll cover a couple different things in here. We'll start with topologies, because this kind of sets the framework for how we'll talk about different types of flows. And then we'll actually talk about how modern auth flows work. We'll touch on token-based identity, the token-based identity model, because that's what we use, tokens. The question we get asked a lot is, so when exactly do my users need to sign in, right? How often when they go home? What are the different conditions when sign-in is required? So we'll walk through that. Interestingly enough, we started getting a lot of questions about the actual tokens themselves, how they're used, how long they last, and so we'll discuss that a bit. And then we'll also cover a roadmap. So what's already available, what's coming up when. Topologies. So if you've been to TechEds before, or MEX, or SharePoint conferences, you've probably seen different permutations of this slide. The real takeaway from this is that there's three sort of main customer patterns that we see. From left to right, you kind of have growing complexity. In the furthest left, what we call managed identities, there is no on-premises infrastructure. You can just go and create those users directly in Office 365, by portal, by PowerShell, whatever works for you. There's no on-premises infrastructure, directory, ADFS, none of that. They're straight up in the cloud. The middle column is called synchronized identities. Now, to be fair, these are still managed identities in that you sign in against our cloud. You're signing in against Azure AD. It's just that the users themselves and groups and contacts and all the other directory objects are sourced from on-premises. These customers run some form of a directory sync. That could be DirSync or the new AAD sync, AAD Connect, that you've heard a lot about this week. But that gets your on-premises directory information into the cloud. It's mastered on-prem, but you sign in against our cloud. And then the right-hand side column, we have federated identities. The big difference here is the presence of a federated STS. This means that your users, if you're in this column, are signing against your on-premises infrastructure, right? They're actually going to hit your ADFS, provide their credentials there, prove who they are, and Office 365 will respect that login. And actually, I believe this next slide is walking through exactly that. How modern authentication looks for a federated user. So we'll start with user. Oh, whoops, that shouldn't have done double. A user wants to open a Word doc, right? They click on a link in an email, or for some reason, they get that URL. Word's going to try to open that document. It's going to reach out to SharePoint in this particular example, or OneDrive for Business, and say, please give me the document located at this URL. For whatever reason, brand new machine, you've cleared your cache, credentials, whatnot. You don't have that token. Your user has not proven who they are yet. The service will come back with a 401, an HTTP 401, and basically say, you got to go sign in, right? And not only that, you need to go sign in here. That's the key part of all this. The service tells us where to go to sign in. We will pop up a Trident control, web view, or the platform-appropriate control for iOS and Android, which then facilitates the next step. We'll go hit that URL that SharePoint Online told us to go to. This, if you remember from the demo a couple seconds ago, is what you get next, right? It's a username password box. Now, the key part here is we're talking about a federated user. And so the user will enter their username, user@contoso.com. And now they've entered the username. What will actually happen is a process called home realm discovery will realize this user belongs to a tenant that's federated based on that domain, contoso.com, and will redirect Word, in this particular case, to the on-premises STS, ADFS, or one of the appropriate third-party providers. The user will then actually do the sign-in against ADFS itself. So no password was exchanged with, in this diagram, Evo STS. It's only when it gets to the ADFS server itself that they're passing the passwords up. That's one of the big benefits of federated identities, right? With synchronized identities or managed identities, the password itself, or a hash of the password, is in the cloud. In a federated identity pattern, no passwords need to be in our cloud at all. They're all in your on-premises environment. ADFS will verify that username password. It's good. It's exactly what it should be. And it'll hand back an interim token. It'll say, Word, go give this back to Evo because I'm done, and yes, this is in fact user@contoso.com. Word will go back to Evo and say, here, I got this from ADFS. I think it's good. You let me know. Evo actually verifies that. It's issued by an ADFS that it knows, Contoso's ADFS, and it in turn returns two things, an access and a refresh token. We'll get into details of exactly how those are used in a minute, but suffice it to say, what we'll do is we want to keep that user signed in as long as we can, so we cache the refresh token in the client in CredMan. We use that access token to actually go back to SharePoint and say, I did what you wanted. I have the user token. Please give me this document back. SharePoint checks, token looks good, and the document's returned. And as my colleague Ross Adams often says, Bob's your uncle. You're off to the races. So we touched on access and refresh tokens in the previous little bit here. There's a difference between the two. The first is that access tokens are what's actually used to access the resource, to get the document. And it's valid for 1 hour. Now, this is an implementation detail for our particular system. It's a 1 hour lifetime on the access token. And what will happen, as you'll see in the next slide here, is when that access token's expired, we'll then fall back to the refresh token. And that's why you see a refresh token has a longer lifetime. It's good for, by default, 14 days. And as long as you continue to use that application and that token continues to be used, it can be good for up to 90 days. So it's a sliding window. So it'll be up to 14 days by default. And then if you continue to use that, your validity window just keeps sliding out until you hit the 90-day mark, at which point neither token's good. You have to go back and sign in again. Two things in response to the questions we always get. Admins can't control the actual lifetime of the token itself. You cannot change 1 hour to 6. You cannot change 14 days to 2. That's just the way the system's built today. And as I mentioned before, the way these two tokens sort of interact is that access token's used to actually go to SharePoint to get the documents. Office is it auto-saves, right? It's continually saving changes. At some point, that access token at T plus 1 hour will expire. We'll silently go and refresh that, get the new access token, and then you're off to the races again. You're continuing to use Word as expected. So what does this actually mean? So how often do users need to sign in? In the demo, as in most cases, when you first have a device, there's nothing on there. Clearly, the user has to sign in at least once. Now, the reason why we started with the topology diagram is in that far right column, in the federated identity column, you can actually set up your environment and your clients so your users don't have to explicitly sign in. Single sign-on is something Office has built into the clients, where we leverage the AD user that's been signed into Windows, and then use the Windows integrated auth flows to sign them in against Office 365. So for customers that have some form of federation, your Windows users can actually be silently signed in. So they did technically perform a sign-in flow. They just didn't explicitly go through the username password collection and all of that. So that's just one thing that we often get asked is, well, how come I don't see the sign-in? If you're federated, that can happen silently under the hood. Another time when you have to sign in, as I mentioned, is when that refresh token expires, right? After 14 or up to 90 days, at some point, that refresh token is just no longer good. And so here, again, there's two possibilities. If you're a managed identity, you got to sign in. There's that flow where you type in your username and password. If you're federated, just like at the very beginning of the whole thing, it could silently just do a single sign-on and sign you in again. So it really depends on what you've deployed, how you've configured your environment. One of the things, we wrote a blog a little bit ago, and there was a sentence in there that I think might have been a little too ambiguous. And so we're going to clarify that one here with, admins can configure policies that might make users need to sign in again. So earlier than expected, earlier than the 90 days or 14 days. Some of these policies are, for example, password expiration, right? So if you make your users expire the passwords every 17 or 50 or 90, whatever that period is, at some point the user has to change their password. And our goal is to say, well, you know what? If the users change their password, we should probably make sure that they actually know that password. This is really that user and not some malicious party that's figured out how to get that token to keep using that. So that's one of the particular policies or events that could lead to a user needing to sign in again. There's other ones as well, and we'll touch on these with later on in this deck, but things like device health, policies around device registration, those can trigger certain flows where a user has to perform a sign-in again. These don't, in the truest sense, invalidate the token. So you're not actually, again, mucking around with the integer value for how long it's valid. It's these states, these policies are being evaluated, and at one point it goes, for some reason, this policy, you don't meet the policy, you're in violation, and you might need to go in through a sign-in flow again. What we do in Office is we try to provide single sign-on between the applications as well. So you sign into Word, as I mentioned before, that the token's cached, and then Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote, Outlook, all of those apps can share that token. So you hopefully, as a user, have to sign in once, and all your applications will just work. You see a lot of these flows where sometimes you have links in one doc and controls in the other, and that's really one of the reasons why we wanted to go there. We wanted to provide that single sign-on because we think there are a lot of scenarios cross-app, and we want to provide as simple an experience for our users as possible. What we don't currently provide, but we're working on, is single sign-on between a client app like Word and websites, SharePoint Online. So if you're in the browser, there actually isn't an explicit single sign-on right now between that browser and the client application. If you previously signed into Word, it could just work, right? The credentials are there, it'll happen to flow through, you get a 200, and your document opens. But we haven't explicitly plumbed that through. The other thing we haven't currently done yet, and again we're looking to in the future, is provide single sign-on across devices. So we remember the associations that you've made between your accounts. So I have this AAD I use for work, and I have a personal account, johnoutlook@outlook.com. We remember that association, but we don't actually sync those tokens between your devices. So it's not truly SSO either. So those are two scenarios we don't currently support. Wanted to call that out just to sort of make sure everyone was aware. And a quick flow diagram for that whole access refresh token exchange that I referred to earlier here. So Word's trying to get that document. It's trying to make a save, right? And it's doing it with an expired access token. SharePoint will come back and say, sorry, that token's no good. Come back with one that's valid. Word will reach out to Evo STS with that refresh token that was cached in Credman, and and say, please give me a new access token. Evo STS will verify that that token is valid, and also perform other checks. This is the choke point where some of the features that we'll talk about later kick in. So if everything looks good, that token's valid, the user's still valid, the device is still valid, it'll take that refresh token and issue a new access token. Word gets the access token, goes back, tries to make that save again to SharePoint, and everything looks good. So that's how these two tokens interact in terms of the overall flow. And again, document opens, and Bob's your uncle. OK, roadmap. So you're probably going to hear this, I think, 5 times today. First of which is the Office 2013 clients are fully, the features are in the Office 2013 clients as of the March update. They're fully supported, and they're production ready. Those features that are in there include, as you mentioned before, authentication against third-party STSs, as well as support for multi-factor authentication. And one thing that is worth calling out here, with Modern Auth, Outlook is no longer using basic authentication for federated users. It is following the passive flows, meaning that your passwords are no longer routing through Exchange Online for your Outlook client scenarios. Those are just some of the bigger features that are in, but again, the March update, fully supported. There's a couple of features we're still just about to get out the door here. The first of which is support for Azure RMS. So I'm going to take a second here and just make sure this is really clear. This is not AD RMS. This is Azure RMS, the cloud RMS. If you're using AD RMS, you're actually good. It all works just fine. The last little bit of plumbing we're doing is for the Azure RMS service compatibility. So that's one that should be coming really, really soon. And the last one is rounding out the external sharing scenarios for guests. This is where I'm using my SharePoint Online tenant. I want to share something out to someone from Contosa Corporation, and then that flow in there. The majority of all those features work. There's just a couple loose ends we have to kind of tie up, and then we'll call those good. There's a blog post out there. The blog is actually linked to here. That's where we'll continue to post updates as we get the last of the features out. One thing worth calling out, we use the term public preview. Preview is misleading, again, because those features that are done are fully supported. It's just we hadn't got these last couple things in, which is why we use that term. So we just wanted to, again, call out March update is fully production ready and supported.
OK, so we've talked about what Modern Auth is, how it works. I wanted to talk more about the features that are enabled by Modern Auth. As an admin, as a customer, why would you use it? What is in it for you? There's also a couple of deep dives in this section that I want to talk about. So we'll start with talking about third-party STSs. Jono talked about how we are investing in making sure that our customers can use what they have instead of having to use ADFS or a particular solution that we recommend. So that's part one. Next, we'll talk about MFA, multi-factor auth. That is the single largest ask we've had for Office. And so we'll deep dive into that, how it works, and what the user experience is like when users use MFA. We'll also talk a bit more about conditional access policies. So these are the policies Jono referred to when he said admins have options to configure policies on how often their users have to sign in or what causes their sign-ins to be invalid. We'll talk a bit more there. And we'll also talk about which forms of credentials does Modern Auth support. So traditionally, it's been username, password, but now we've got more options. So we'll talk a bit more about that. So the Works with Office 365 program. This is a great example in the identity space of how we are working on making sure that our customers can use what they already have. So several popular third-party STSs, Shibboleth, Ping, SiteMinder, lots of these STSs are now certified to work with Office 365 services. So far, these worked for browser access. So if you were using IDCRL, our old legacy auth stack, they work with browser scenarios. So you could use those IDPs, have users authenticate against the browser, but not against client apps. So not against Windows or iOS client apps. We changed that with modern authentication. So you could use your own IDP and use that to authenticate your users against your clients now. Every modern auth enabled client can use any of these third-party STSs. There are no restrictions on how and which scenarios work, as long as the STS is certified for the program. There's a link on here that links you to details of the program, and there's a list of STSs on there and the details of how they work with Office. So I encourage you to take a look. MFA. This is just synonymous with modern auth. The most questions I've gotten on this feature has been about MFA, so I wanted to deep dive into MFA. We often hear that our admins want users to prove who they are, not just based on what they know, which is my username password, which could be on a sticky note somewhere, but also something that I have. Maybe it's an RSA token, maybe it's a phone call, a text message, a second factor, which is something I possess. That is multi-factor authentication. There are a couple of options for what admins can configure in terms of multi-factor authentication. Ultimately, it's the admin's choice on which methods they want their users to use. The most common forms we see our customers use are Azure MFA, which is phone factor. So you could get a phone call, you could get a text message, you could use an authenticator app, or you could use smart cards, physical, virtual, any form of those. As an admin, the kind of options that are available to you depend on the topology you are in. So if you have managed identities, they can be configured for Azure AD MFA, which is MFA that happens in the cloud. But if you're federated, you can have your choice of any on-prem MFA provider as long as they are compatible with your on-prem STS. In terms of Office client, we are agnostic to how you perform MFA on-prem as long as we receive a token that we can now use to go to a resource and get you the documents you want. So if you're federated, use any on-prem MFA provider that can work with Office. I also wanted to go through the flow once and see what changes between the flow Jono just showed us, which was straight up authentication using modern auth, and what happens if you're enabled for MFA. So let's assume I have a managed identity and my admin has enabled me, my user, for MFA. I go to Word and I'm trying to open a document that is hosted on my SharePoint. I'm taking Word as an example here. If it was email, I'd be going to Exchange Online, but the flow would remain the same. So the app goes to the resource, SharePoint in this case, and tries to request the doc. At this point, I don't have a token. Maybe my token is expired or I've never signed in before. So SharePoint wants me to go to the authority URL, which in this case is Evo STS, because this is managed. There isn't an on-prem IDP. So Evo is the authority URL that SharePoint trusts and wants a token from. So now the app realizes that, okay, hey, I need to show you the login screen and the user needs to log in. So we show you the Trident control and we show you the Evo STS login page, the Office 365 login page. This is where the user enters his username password. We send it through the Evo and Evo verifies the username and the password. In the process, Evo realizes that, hey, I, as a user, have been enabled for MFA. So before I get access to the document, which is before I get the token I will use, I should perform MFA. I need to present a second factor. So that is what happens next. The app understands that, hey, this user needs MFA, and the app will redirect the user to the Azure AD MFA flow. Because again, managed identities, the one option you have is Azure AD MFA. Let's assume I have a phone call set up, and this is Jono's favorite animation. I received the phone call.
It was hard to get that animation to do exactly what we wanted.
So he says, so I've successfully performed Azure AD MFA, and now I've satisfied the requirements of, I've given you my username, password, and I've proved my identity with something I have in my possession, which in this case was my phone. So now that both requirements are satisfied, EO is happy, and I will get an access token back. Actually, it's an access token and a refresh token. Like we talked about earlier, EO will give Word both these tokens back. Word will cache the refresh token for when you want the document next, and use the access token to go to SharePoint and request the document, the first step, but now with a token. And now things just work. You've satisfied all these conditions. You've got the right tokens. You get your document and our favorite animation. So that was a deep dive into MFA and how the flow works. As an admin, how do you enable users for MFA? The first thing I want to call out is that users are enabled in the directory and not per app. So when I, as a user, was enabled for MFA, I'm going to get MFA in every single scenario. I access a document using a browser, or I access a document using a client, I'm going to get MFA prompts. There isn't a world where I get MFA only in a given app of my choosing. That was point one. Point two is, as a user, what happens to me when an admin enables MFA? Nothing much right away. Enabling an MFA doesn't cause a new prompt to show up, or it doesn't cause anything drastic right away. But the change is, the next time the user signs in after being enabled, the first sign-in will require the user to configure themselves for MFA. So let's say I choose to set up the Authenticator app. So I will scan a barcode. I will go ahead, set myself up in the first run. And after that, each time I sign in, I will be prompted for MFA. The key distinction to make here is being enabled for MFA in and of itself does not change the lifetime of tokens or the behavior of these tokens. It's just that every time I sign in, I will have to sign in using MFA. But it doesn't change how often I sign in, unless we use conditional access policies or something that changes the validity of my sign-in. MFA by itself will not change that. This brings us to the next question, which is, what happened to app passwords? They were a legacy thing, which I'm glad we are done with. App passwords were a way to exercise MFA, and I mean MFA slightly loosely here, because they were a string you would get, which would serve as your special password to work with apps that needed MFA but weren't able to do true MFA. So you'd get this special string that you'd enter instead of your password, and that would count as your second factor. But now with modern auth, all of these modern auth enabled tenants can do true MFA. So they can support phone calls, smart cards, whatever it is that you are set up for. So you don't have to remember those ugly, weird strings anymore. You can just log in with a true second factor across all modern auth enabled apps. And the platform, the UX is pretty consistent across platforms, even across iOS, Android, Windows. It's pretty consistent.
All right, so this is the part of the show where the audience gets to start interacting. A couple questions I usually like to ask. I'm just trying to get a feel for, earlier when we talked about managed versus federated identities, how many folks here are running a federated topology? Okay, actually a good chunk. Out of curiosity of that, how many are running ADFS? And then non-ADFS? Oh, okay, so it's a decent number. And okay, well, thank you for that. And I have one more question in about 25 seconds, so we'll get there. But so what Shweta was just talking about, MFA, it's about the user, right? MFA is the user's going to prove who they say they are by giving a second piece of guarantee, answering a phone call, text message, or the app that I just used. But there's actually a second pivot or dimension to thinking about protecting your resources, right? And that's actually the device itself. What is the device the user's using to get at my stuff, right? And so client access filtering, it's a feature of ADFS. It's something we brought out just shortly after, I think, Office 365 initially GA'd back in 2011. It works with only ADFS right now, obviously, because it's in ADFS, by inspecting the incoming traffic of federated users. what it would do is look at the incoming request for authentication and say, where is this coming from, right? It would match it against some fairly limited and coarse-grained conditions and make a decision. A really prevalent example was, look, block Outlook if it's coming from off-premises, right? So it would know that because of the way we used to do authentication with Exchange Online, that this request was a user authentication request from Exchange Online. And if it hit your ADFS proxy, it was from outside. So block. Like there's very, very specific ways in which we provided this scenario support to admins. But the problem was that didn't really map to what most administrators needed, or that they really should think that they need, right? That was a very, very high level just cut off if off-prem. One other thing I'll kind of mention real quick, not only was it sort of limited and coarse-grained, the way in which it inspected the endpoints on ADFS it leveraged to do that determination actually doesn't work with the new OAuth flows, right? The basis of OAuth is it's passive. It uses the WS-Fed endpoints on your STS. The way that client access filtering used to work is you would know something is coming in on WS Trust, do some inspection there. It doesn't map to the way that OAuth will work. So we're not leaving you high and dry. We have these new features called conditional access policies and mobile device management, MDM. You've probably seen this, in the various keynotes for Build, here, other sessions throughout the week. We've actually included links to 2 of the sessions that happened yesterday, I think, that talked about these features in more detail. But in the context of here, this is the solution. This is the future of that access filtering, right? You don't really want to necessarily have all users off premises not able to sync mail. What you don't want is that new hire going to the hotel lobby machine, opening Outlook on there, and syncing the entirety of his mailbox. That's what you actually don't want, right? If Jono is in his hotel room checking his corporate mail from his corporate managed device, maybe that's okay. That's the type of thing that we're talking about that conditional access policies and MDM gets you into, right? It's more granular in the relevant controls you need to really map to the type of security and protection you want to provide for your corporate network. Now, some of these features are free. In the Office 365 admin portal, you'll actually see, I believe it's called device management there on the left-hand side underneath, in the left-hand side menu, sorry. And that opens up a variety of scenarios and features. You can protect your devices, or don't allow devices to sync mail via ActiveSync if it's not a registered device. Like, there's quite a few policies that are in there already. Some of the more granular or the extended features are available as add-ons to Office 365. So depending on what scenarios you have, what you need, some is already in with Office 365. Others are part of, for example, the EMS SKU or AAD Premium. So suffice it to say, we have those controls. It really depends on what you want and what you need. Out of curiosity, how many folks are using client access filtering in ADFS? OK, great. I think that maps to sort of what we've seen as well, right, with our other programs. So, and another topic here is support for smart cards. So we've talked about using various forms of multi-factor authentication. Smart card can be the second factor of auth, just as a phone call can. ADFS and some third-party STSs allow you to configure a variety of other forms as well. So a fingerprint, you can do biometric. I know there's one out there that looks at your GPS position and figures things out. So a whole wealth of stuff that's out there. But ADFS actually allows you to use smart cards or certificates as your primary factor of authentication as well. We call that certificate-based auth. It's not fully supported yet on the iOS and Android apps because of OS limitations as well. But just wanted to call out that it is possible. We have quite a few large enterprise customers that have configured this. You don't need a username and password. You just use a smart card to do your sign-in. So that's possible with ADFS, and it's fully supported on the Windows Office clients because the OS itself will support some of that, whereas with mobile devices don't have smart card readers, for example, right? So there's limitations across the variety of platforms there. But the Office clients, where possible, do support certificate-based authentication. All right, what's available where? This is always the ugliest table possible. Let me just kind of run across the top 3 rows, because those are usually the ones we get asked about. So as I mentioned before, for the Office clients, your Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote, those are available in Office 2013 as of the March update. So if you're running the MSIs, just get onto the March update. If you click to run, just click to update. And you should be able to get that going on 2013. There's a 2016 beta out right now. You can get that a variety of ways. I think you can get it through the Pro Plus Click to Run channel. You can get it again as an MSI download. Doesn't make a difference. It's in there as well. Just need to be enabled. So that's in Office 2016 beta. For Mac, the Office for Mac 2016 also has support for modern authentication, as do the iOS and Android apps that are out there right now. So the things you get from the App Store or Google Play, those are fully supporting the modern authentication flows that we've been talking about here today. Link. So on the Windows platform, it's the same story for Link as with Word, Excel, PowerPoint. 2013, it's out there as of the March update. It's in beta with the 2016 beta bits. We are TBD on the Mac OS platform. We should be getting an update on that soon. And the iOS and Android apps for Skype for Business, sorry, I realized I said Link twice. For the Skype for Business apps, those are coming soon as well. Outlook. How many folks here care more about Outlook for MFA and conditional access than other apps? How many care about other apps more than Outlook? Some love for Word and Excel and PowerPoint. OK. So Outlook, again, for Office 2013 on Windows, it's in there with the March update. 2016, it's in beta. Same story there. The Mac OS, there's a blob of text here that says something that's actually worth calling out. As of right now, the thing that's in beta, we use ADAL, that component in the client, for the subscription and licensing flows. We're working on getting it in for the regular mailbox access. So it's just a little bit of an asterisk in there, trying to be as clear and truthful with you guys as possible. iOS and Android, so there's a couple apps that are out there, right? Outlook here refers to the recent Accompli acquisition. So just to be clear, that's coming in Q2 calendar 15. That's part of Brad or someone's keynote. I can't remember, but they mentioned that. So Q2 calendar 15, which is not that, well, it's now. And then there's the OA apps. So those are the ones that were out there called OA, right? They've been there for a little bit. We will not be retrofitting modern authentication into the OA apps. All new innovation on the iOS and Android clients for mail will be in the Outlook application, the Accompli. So I just wanted to call that out. Apologize, I realized we didn't put that in there. The OneDrive for Business apps, in case you're interested, the information's there as well. They're available now on most platforms. And Yammer is also available on Windows Phone, iOS, and Android, and there aren't any apps for the Mac OS and Windows. One thing I also wanted, no, actually that's it. Right, Windows Phone, so coming soon. The next release of Windows Phone, all the apps out of the box will support modern authentication. So that's why you kind of have that Windows Phone column in there. The OneDrive for Business and Yammer apps are referring to the Windows Phone 8.1 apps, the ones that are already out there in market. So Windows Phone 8.1, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Mail client, they don't. The OneDrive for Business and Yammer do. Windows 10, all apps will. All right, takeaways. So a couple things just to drill home again. So Modern Auth enables a bunch of stuff, including multi-factor authentication and conditional access. At the end of the day, it's up to you, right, what you want to enable within there. It's up to you with your ADFS infrastructure, what form of MFA you want to perform, smart card, RSA token, phone call, all of those. Same with conditional access. They give you the flexibility to meet your needs. Modern authentication is the code and the features within Office clients that enable those to work, right? Again, available across all platforms. That previous table was the gory details. Won't go there anymore. I promised you there was 5 times we referenced this, so this is the 5th and last. It's available for Windows as well. It's in the March update for Office 2013. You just have to flip that on, and then those features are fully production ready and supported. We actually have hundreds of enterprise customers that are fully deployed already, so they're out there using it right now. Most of which I believe are federated based on the information we have. So it's in production, as well as with Microsoft. Like, we use it internally with our own users as well. And as I mentioned before, it's really up to you how you want to configure MFA, how you want to configure conditional access. And there's a lot more details I know earlier this week about those features and what you can actually do. Just a quick kind of get going with Modern Auth. This has it has 4 links that you can read up more on. How to enable your tenant for modern authentication, aka MS public preview. How to enable your clients for that. There's an asterisk there that points to below. iOS, Android, Mac OS clients are by default enabled for modern authentication. You don't have to do anything there. Office Desktop, so 2013 and 2016, the ones that can run on domain-joined machines, because we wanted to provide back compat, so you as an enterprise can decide who and when to flip where, you actually have to enable the client for modern authentication. The details are in there in that, the link, the auth admin how-to. But that gives you a rollout strategy. You can do internal validation testing and do all those things. So that's why the desktop clients, which run on the domain join machines, those ones there require sort of a flip a bit. You can do it by pushing the reg key out, SCCM, whatever options you have. That, I think, actually brings us to the end of the plan stuff, because like I said, I wanted to make sure we had time to answer any of your questions. So I only have 2 T-shirts. You can either be the first 2 that ask the question or the last 2, I'm not sure. But feel free to grab a mic, and we'll just start taking questions.
Are there any plans to let people configure multi-factor authentication on a per app basis? For instance, Yammer, we don't need multi-factor, but all the rest there is.
Yeah, you know, I don't want to, we don't own that part of the service, we don't want to misspeak, but I believe they've gotten that ask actually quite a few times, and that's something that they're looking in to see what they can do. It's not on a confirmed roadmap that we're aware of, but I know that we get that quite a bit. So exactly as you mentioned, I want it here only, I don't need it for these other ones. So I know that we've at least gotten the ask a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, so I have customers that are on ADFS 2.0 and 2.1. Would it be worth waiting for Server 10 to come out, or would it be better to go to 3.0 right now?
So you're on ADFS, well, customers are on ADFS 2.0.
2.1, yeah.
Nothing about this feature set here actually needs you to move to 3.
Well, and really what I'm looking for, are there any features that you talk about that are coming out in Server 10 that would be worth waiting for instead of going through migration?
Oh, I see, I see. Do you know of any?
Aware of, no.
No, I don't think there, at least again, not in the context of modern authentication, the features that are available now, I don't think there are any 10 specific dependencies that we're aware of.
We've seen a lot of emphasis on the new biometrics in Windows Hello and Microsoft Passport. If there are managed identities in the future and machines that have been joined to Azure AD directly, will there ever be the ability to do true SSO through Office?
Okay, so to put the pieces together, like Windows Hello, the biometrics in Windows 10, right?
Yeah.
And then you were talking about cloud domain join, when I can domain join directly to Windows Azure AD, and whether Office will support that. The reason why I had to break it out that way, the answer is we're going there. So in the next generation of Office, we are building on top of Windows 10. We're using, they're calling it the Web Authentication Manager, I think. We call it internally Token Broker, but the OS component that does all of the authentication and state management, we are built on top of that. And so we have a little bit of stuff left to do to finish off, but we are going to be in the place where you could use those to do a sign-in.
By GA, or?
I don't know. I don't think so. Not by GA yet. We have a little bit more to go beyond that, but it is in our roadmap to get there, to provide the same level of options that Windows itself provides for users that are using Windows with Office.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I didn't even know who just spoke. Sorry.
Me. I'll just ask real quick. We're using alternate ID on our ADFS single sign-on because we have users with just old UPNs and we're trying to get them adapted to email addresses to log on, and we don't want to change all their user IDs. I was told that if you're running a hybrid Exchange environment, you can't do alternate ID ADFS sign-on. Is that still the case with the modern way of authenticating with Outlook or with into Exchange?
That's a great question. So the answer, well, the question was, does it basically change the supportability of Exchange hybrid deployments, right?
Yeah.
The modern authentication stack. At this point, it does not. So we are still in the same supportability. There's the 3 bullet points, I think, on the wiki and the TechNet article, right? Office 365 Pro Plus activation, and then Exchange hybrid deployments are known issues right now. We're working through those, try to get to where they are supported, but enabling modern authentication doesn't automatically fix it up.
Okay.
Yep.
Any idea, like, next 6 months, when we could do that?
The danger of putting a number out there is it gets written down somewhere.
Yeah.
We are actively looking at that right now across the Exchange org, our org, and then Azure AD. So,
Okay.
but we don't have a final timeline yet.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Sweet.
Yeah, with conditional access, will you allow that to be controlled by non-Microsoft MDMs? Because although we will get it with our Office 365 tenant, we can't enroll our devices with that because they're enrolled with AirWatch.
You know, I don't know enough about the roadmap there for third-party MDM support. So if it's possible, can I Can you grab me after? I'll get you contact with someone who could answer that.
Yeah,
I just don't know enough about what they're committing to give an answer.
All right, thank you.
Yes. Does it work with if you have several different accounts in Outlook? How does that look for the user?
Do you want to talk about it? So there was multiple users from the same tenant using the same instance of Outlook.
I mean, you have multiple accounts in Outlook.
Okay.
So how does the user know when to put in what credentials?
Okay. So in this case, the user would be, like, they're adding a mailbox or whatever that happens to be. They're going to type their username and password, right? So they would know which user they were trying to sign into the mailbox for and therefore provide their password and perform the MFA as appropriate. So I'm not sure what you mean by how they would know which one to use. Sorry, I might be misunderstanding the question.
But it works, though.
We do support multiple users in Outlook, yes. That's for sure. Sorry, I was trying to figure out which account to use. Okay.
Would there be a possibility to use multiple forms of MFA? Like, let's say some users use maybe RSA and others use the phone factor auth app?
I believe so. You can configure users you can have a list of things you approve of, and then the users can set themselves up with the way they want. So for example, I think for the demo, Jono was set up with his Authenticator app, but I get text messages.
Gotcha.
So both of those work.
Okay, thank you.
In the back corner there?
Will MFA eventually work with PowerShell, logging onto PowerShell?
Yes, eventually. We're working on it right now. We're engaged with the teams that own the Azure AD, the Exchange, the SharePoint, the Link PowerShell. We're working on it. So that's why I kind of smirked when you said that, because I knew someone was going to ask. Eventually, we're getting
That's
there.
worth a T-shirt.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. As far as the third-party SDS and MFA is concerned, as long as I just want to clarify is that as long as it's authenticated and says third-party SDS says yes, this is the authenticated user, it will provide the access, right? So it doesn't matter what kind of if you're using, let's say we use Ping for identity authentication, we don't use Ping's multi-factor authentication or their token-based, and we use somebody else's token. Will that still work? As long as Ping supports it, if Ping says, yes, it's authenticated, does the Microsoft care how that works? And I know the answer, but I just want to kind of clarify that.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is there's, if you draw like a node diagram of sorts, there's going to be Microsoft, our cloud, Azure AD. You have a Ping instance on premises, and there's on the other side of that a daisy chain something else. That's actually performing the authentication of some sort, issuing a token or whatnot to Ping. Ping consumes that and issues its standard token for Azure AD. That's what you're getting at?
I mean, kind of, let's give you a perfect example. We use, like I said, we use Ping identity, and we use I think DigiPass. So we haven't gotten to work Ping identity to work with DigiPass yet, but I think there is a case where it does work. So what my question was, if we allow these two cases, as long as the user is authenticated properly, they will be able to get to their documents, correct?
So I'm going to say I believe the answer is yes, and I'll make the statement that I know for sure is true. As long as Ping issues the same token, whether Ping itself did all the work or someone else did the work, right? Because the trust is between Azure AD and Ping. So if the token is the same in both cases, then it will work.
That's what my thought was. Thank
you. Okay.
Hi, yes. I have a quick question. We are an Outlook 2010 shop primarily, and I was curious what options we have to make sure that a user is on a domain or on our network using when they authenticate the ADFS. I didn't see the 2010 on the support list there, so I just want to reaffirm what is it we have to do. We're looking at ADFS rules and stuff like that, but we know that the authentication request comes from the internet, which is a little different. So what options do we have?
So as I understand it, you have Outlook 2010,
yes,
and you want a rule that says users that use 2010 must be allowed, or
no, only people that are on our network are allowed to, authenticate.
So
the
I must
ADFS.
be on CorpNet.
Yes, exactly.
You could use client access filtering rules, or you could use conditional access.
So we can use client the filtering rules in the IP of the client will come through from the Federation Gateway. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's exactly the pattern.
Okay.
Because the Exchange Online sends the request, it proxies it through, right, to your on-premises ADFS servers, and in there it's x dash something forwarded IP, and so decisions can be made based on that. So that is a supported scenario to be able to say if off corporate network or outside of IP range, then block access.
Okay, I just wasn't sure because the Federation request comes from the gateway. Does it pass the IP of the client along with it? That's my concern. We haven't tested it, but I'm just.
Oh, I see. You're using MFG? Yeah, I think it's forwarded IP or something like that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, if your load balancer is got the X forwarded for.
Is it forwarded some IP or something? It's a header in there that's what's inspected to make those decisions.
To differentiate between IPs coming from the internet versus your internal network.
Okay, I just want to make sure because that workload is different because it does actually come from the Federation Gateway versus.
Right, and it's in the header itself. So because Exchange Online is what sent it over, it injects that header. And I apologize, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I'm pretty sure it is forwarded IP, X something forwarded IP in there. That's what the policies, the client access filtering policies will use to make the determination.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the header will. Yeah, there's a couple, and I realize we didn't put the link in here, but if you go to TechNet and search for client access filtering, it actually lays out the several different headers for the different scenarios, and they allow you to target, in this case, Outlook client versus Exchange Active Sync and the such. So the headers are all there for exactly that. Yep.
So we're using claims rules to block Outlook externally. And we'd like to be able to do the same for some of the 365 web services. But today, they're all kind of lumped in. They're all basically, looked at the same way.
It's all passive traffic coming to AWS Federation
Yeah,
endpoint.
so if we wanted to block OWA, we'd also be blocking SharePoint, Intune, the company portal app requires
and modern authentication clients, because they all come in on the same endpoint.
Yeah. Is there a roadmap to be able to isolate the various web services?
Yeah,
access
so
rules?
Absolutely. So the conditional access policies that we were referring to in there provides you that granularity. I think if you can grab me afterwards, we can double check. I think it's actually in preview right now. You could take a look, but you can do things such as specify in the conditional access policies the service or resource that's being accessed. So you could say, for example, if accessing Exchange Online, and that's how you would then target, the mail service, and this is a rich client or a web client, so it gives you that granularity to be able to target web browser access to SharePoint or, client access to Exchange. So that's where the client access policies functionality would come in to give you the control you're looking for. And like I said, we can definitely follow up. I'm pretty sure the AAD Premium, it's in preview there already, so you could see some of that. At the very least, I can get you in touch with the PM that owns it, so we can get you more details there.
Great, thanks.
You bet.
I have a follow-up question on that. Is there, with client, I guess not client access policies, but conditional access, is it possible to enable a scenario where a user can access pretty much every service from a corporate managed laptop, but then if they're accessing from a BYO, say maybe they could only get to OWA and not through the rich clients?
I think this is getting to the edge of our knowledge, but I believe the answer is yes, there's going to be ways to do that. Because what you're basically saying is if this is a device that I manage or my IT department manages, it's a known device, allow it to do certain stuff, otherwise don't let it do certain things, right? It's pivoted off of that. I think it was the conditional access policy session, the link that's in the deck, points to the session yesterday or earlier this week that goes into detail around those. I apologize, I don't know exactly what the policy, the details are around how to set that up, but that type of control, the pivot on, is this a device I know or some random iPad or Android, that's exactly what they're going after, is providing that granularity of control.
But that scenario was one that was specifically not supported with client access policies, so I guess I'm wondering, is that something where the granularity is extended by virtue of the modern auth?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Right, with client access filtering, it's something that we couldn't do because we didn't have the knowledge about the device itself. The main difference here, so as you kind of called out, modern authentication is using a different, actually it's behind the scenes, it's a different service in the cloud to do authentication. That service now has knowledge and ties into, you may have seen some of these in Build, but you can enroll your device, right, with Azure AD for management. So it brings that knowledge into the fold as well. So that's where modern auth sort of enables those scenarios, whereas client access filtering with ADFS previously didn't have that same sort of ability to look at multiple pivots to make a decision.
All right, thanks.
I really like the modern auth and the single sign-on features. One of the problems that I see starting to arise in the BYOD movement is kind of an authentication schizophrenia, where it's difficult to keep track of your consumer versus corporate logins for some of these clients. So the Office apps, it's great that it guesses automatically to connect for one application, for one document, but if you're turning around to try to do something in the consumer world, it's difficult to switch those identities or even to know which identity it's going to use by default. Do you have any tips on how to manage that identity disorder?
That's actually a disorder we talk about a lot in our meetings.
We live it every day.
Yes. So yes, we've been thinking a lot about it, and it is definitely something we want to address, especially in this new world where I actually sign with a lot of accounts, but I'm not essentially commenting on a party invite using my work account. So yes, we've been actively working on it, and we want to make it clearer in the UX, so that users know what they're commenting as or what they're opening documents as, and also make it easier for admins to make the delineation possible. Here's a corporate device. Maybe I don't want you to sign in with your home accounts. So we've been working on that, yes.
Awesome.
And just for the completeness of the conversation, like the web side of things are the same, right? What's my OneDrive consumer website URL versus my OneDrive business URL? Like Outlook.com for work, Outlook.com for home. So Microsoft in a whole, like we're engaged in these conversations. We need to make it better. We're going to make it right. And so we're actively, like Shweta said, looking at this every day. Like we live that disorder and we're trying to fix it. So
cool. Thank you.
You bet.
I didn't see Shibboleth on your list of approved STS on the website. Does that indicate it's not fully supported?
I believe it is.
It's on there.
It's on there.
Oh, sorry, yeah, it just said Shib.
We said, yeah.
We were lazy with lettering. Actually, if you go to TechNet and search for Works with Office 365, I think there's about 18 to 20 vendors that are on there. Shibboleth is definitely one of the ones that we do support.
Okay, I have a question, a little bit off topic. So we've used MFA for global admins for a while, and we want to start using that for our end users as well. So we got AD Premium, and we enter the network for an excluded for two-factor. So what happened is that all our global admins also were excluded, of course, because they're on the same network. Is there any way to enable them to force having two-factor anyway because they're in a group or something?
So we actually do this at Microsoft. If you can grab me after, we can maybe drop a mail to the PM that owns that, because we have the same thing. We say within Microsoft, if you're off corporate network, require MFA. If you're internal, don't. And also, there's a very well-known group that always does the second factor. I don't know enough about AD Prima, Shweta, unless you know, but we can get you in touch with the folks that do own that. That way we can help you understand how you can configure that, though.
From an ADFS standpoint, can you clarify how many times an iOS user has to type in their email address during the login process?
Okay, so like a federated user on iOS doing a sign-in.
Exactly. I've seen in the past, we used to use Okta as our federated provider.
Right.
And the user would have to type in the email address, then the page would redirect to an Okta screen, but they'd have to type in the email address again, then their password. So I was just trying to see if we can have any clarification. And if you use
I see. Right, the first screen is what email do you want to use with Office, and the second one was the actual login screen. And what you're saying is it didn't autofill the second screen's username with the email you provided in the first step. It should. So let me, we need to follow up on that.
Yeah, come find us.
Yeah, because it should. It should autofill because you gave it to us already. We can pop it into the second window there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question about authentication, modern authentication in Office, in Outlook specifically. So what we have today, I log on to Office 365, redirect to a federated server, and then on the same screen where I type my domain credentials, I can see second factor authentication, exactly on the same frame, on the Windows form. And if I type correctly my second factor authentication, I've been given option to go on my inbox. With the Reach client, today, with the new option, I will see this prompt asking for username and password. Is this the same frame will allow me to type the second factor authentication?
How have you configured that is it you're using ADFS, sorry, or what's your?
So today, to log on my Outlook web access mailbox,
right.
I go Office 365. Based on my domain being redirected to my ADFS server,
right.
Type my credentials, and if I have an agent inside of ADFS, this agent being called and show me a prompt for second factor authentication.
I see. Right in line on that same page.
Yeah.
Yep.
On the side. So how the same scenario will work with the modern authentication, and if this frame that will come up asking my username and password, if it will be having the same functionality as this web page today.
I see. So I know it's doable because Microsoft's MFA actually does that from within the client as well as the browser. I believe it's customizations that you make to the ADFS page itself and how it will, like the JavaScript and how it pops up. So I know it's doable. Sorry, we're not ADFS experts in that particular respect.
So in any way, any additional customization that I want on top of username and password, I will need to have ADFS server.
That's correct, yes. You would rely on
it cannot happen against Office 365.
Oh, yeah. If you're a managed identity, so if you're signing in against the cloud, it's limited in terms of what you can sort of do customization-wise. As you saw when I did the login for the demo, it will do the phone call only for a managed identity, right? In the cases where you want to be more advanced, it is an ADFS page customization that would render in the web view, right, in the trident control that we show. But it's customizations on your ADFS server that would enable that scenario to do it inline.
And we still work in ADFS 3.0 with the modern authentication. Right?
Did you say 2.0 or 3?
3.0.
Yeah.
Same. All right, thank you.
Is there any way?
Is there any way to use this modern authentication to access on-prem SharePoint and Exchange?
It's a good thing you ask. We have our expert on on-prem MFA.
The answer is yes, eventually. We are working on it right now. So it's on our roadmap, but I don't have a date I can share yet.
So what components would I need to have in place in the on-prem environment? So we have ADFS already, SharePoint 2013. We're about to go to Exchange 2013.
I have to get back to you on the exact versions you need because that's something we're working on right now because we need to have a supportability matrix of here's where all we're going to support it. And it's in progress right now.
The one thing I'll add to that is I know that there are, I've seen them myself, certain blogs and wikis on the web about how people have gotten MFA to work with SharePoint. It's via forms-based auth, right? They've kind of done that in the past because you could set up claim providers and all that. So I just wanted to lay out there. What we're talking about here is kind of the holistic approach for all Office servers on premises, how to get proper MFA with modern authentication. There's ways that we've seen customers set up using FBA, sort of 2FA for SharePoint specifically. So we want to get it right across all of them. We know that it's possible using certain configs of FBA with SharePoint server on-prem. And that's where sometimes you're going to see differing opinions on, is it supported, does it work? Well, we don't have a comprehensive solution that it gives the full flexibility of modern auth, right? Because what we want to do is the work we'll do should also support on-premises conditional access and all of that, right? We want to have the same stack serve both. And so for because you mentioned SharePoint on-prem in particular, we do know that with FBA it's possible, but then it ends there, right? Like the other features that we want to support with modern auth won't work in that same way necessarily. So that's why you'll see some people say it's doable. It's because with FBA, you can plumb that through, but it's just for the MFA bit in there.
I guess maybe another clarifying question, just to make sure I understood what you guys were saying earlier in the presentation. So I understand there's kind of two approaches to doing multi-factor. One is to get Azure AD to do the multi-factor, and the other is if I have on-prem ADFS, to get ADFS to do the multi-factor. Is that correct?
Yes.
Got a question. Recently we just deployed ADFS, and a bunch of our users that have Office 2013 joined to the on-premise domain, which they happen to log in with the same UPN that they would be eventually using in Office 365, which we haven't rolled out yet, discovered that their MRU list disappeared and all their Office Pref settings disappeared. Did we experience modern authentication without even doing anything?
No, you experienced a feature that we didn't know we had. Our team also happens to own the
Glad you
MRU.
acknowledged it at least.
Yeah, no, basically the MRU service, which you called out, where our team actually owns as well, it kind of is a binary mode service. So what it does is it actually looks at the sign-in name and checks first to see if it's in the cloud. If it exists in Azure AD, so what you probably did was federated the domain, right?
That's all we did was federate the domain. We didn't even check any licensing or anybody with any cloud access. It was just like everyone Monday morning was like, where'd it all go?
Yeah, exactly. You went, you set MSL federation or whatever that one command that was that everyone uses, and then it just went away. What basically happened was because we'll do a discovery on that domain, contoso.com. It'll come back and say, yeah, this is an Office 365. Then we'll start writing the MRU to the cloud. But there is no migration from the local store. So prior to that, everything was on the PC or whichever device, and then now it's just reading and writing from cloud. So that's what actually ended up happening. If you want to switch back for the period of time when you're not yet in the cloud, if you grab me after, I think there's steps on how to do that. But basically, if it's okay, because you're going to go to the cloud, leave it on the cloud.
Discovered that the Windows Explorer jump list, you could right-click on the icon, and that was good enough for them. So it wasn't a huge deal, but it was just kind of a, gee, how did we not know this was going to happen? Even all the white papers didn't make any mention of this happening, although we did find a TechNet article that sort of alluded to what happened.
So you win the prize. You get the T-shirt. You found the feature that we didn't know existed until someone asked it. It's the way that it kind of checks to see if you're in the cloud. And unfortunately, it isn't, is Bob using Office 365? Is this domain present and federated? And so if it is right to cloud, that's the problem.
So it's kind of like a cloud awareness that it has that basically is smart enough to know just by the matching UPN.
Exactly right. And we ideally want everyone to be in the cloud because that will roam with you, right, across your devices and all of that. So that's why we are definitely looking at sort of a cloud connected first, which is where that decision kind of fires, right? Is if you're in the cloud, put your MRU there, and then no matter where you go, new device, cross device, you'll have a consistent MRU.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you want a T-shirt for that? Where'd the split or the split brain identity guy go?
Split brain.
The identity issues. Yeah.
So is there a date when the modern auth is being enabled by default for desktop clients?
You do it.
Okay. He's making me take the tough questions. We are working on a date. We are actively working on a plan to get these on by default. We have to address some back compat issues first, and we have to make sure our larger customers who will probably want this in a phased rollout are okay with what we are doing. But yes, it's on the roadmap. I don't have a date I can publicly share, but our blog should have posts when we have a roadmap we can share.
But it is one of the bigger asks we had, especially from companies that have a lot of folks in the field, not on domain-joined PCs, and educational institutions, right? Alumni and students. So it's definitely top of mind and for us.
It's the number 2 thing I think of after I think of identity disorders.
Tough list, right? Was there? Okay. Well, thanks everyone for coming out.